Now, one thing that strikes me about St Lucia, and I think you guys are alluding to it, so they're just to create context. So there are 5 jurisdictions or 5 islands or 5 countries in the Caribbean which offer citizenship by investment. Aside from St Lucia, we have Grenada, Antigua Barbuda, Dominicus, and Kitts Nevis, right? Now, St Lucia, relatively speaking, is probably bigger in terms of population size, at least. So therefore, it's less, yes, it is laid back, but not as much as perhaps of some of the neighboring territories. So whereas I've heard comments that, okay, some of the others, I want the citizenship, but if I live there, it might be too boring. St. Lucia, may have a different value proposition in that, there's so much going on. It could be an interesting place for someone who is actually looking for a place to live, that second or third jurisdiction, depending on how they plan their lives. So that is interesting. However, on the flip side, taxation. So some of the others have relatively simpler tax regimes, but of course, St. Lucia is not a tax-free jurisdiction, but it does have territorial tax. So generally speaking, income that arises outside of St. Lucia is not taxed, but investments in St. Lucia would be taxed. How do you comment on the livability of St. Lucia and the relative tax appeal of St. Lucia, generally speaking? You're on mute if you're speaking.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I mean, generally speaking, yes, you are correct. We adopt a territorial tax approach. The thing about it is that, okay, let's step back for a second and sort of again provide a little more context. We're an independent small island developing state that is largely dependent on tourism for income. We're competing because of our physical location. We're competing, so say mainland Europe, for example, we're competing with sort of cheaper options on the doorstep of London, of England and France and all the rest of on the rest of Europe. We have to earn money some way. The thing about it is that we cannot be a zero tax jurisdiction as a matter of fact. Because of our transition from what was largely an agricultural-based economy to a tourism-based economy, we've had to maintain the tax system, and that's where the majority of St. Lucia's or the government's income is derived. There's no way about getting around from that. We have to provide social services to everybody, just like anybody else. Medical, security, and all the rest of it, and so. That is why the government has taken on initiatives like CBI, because that is where you are going to add, income into your treasury to fund all of these various things. There's no getting around that. But I will say to you that what is interesting about when you look at St. Lucia's comparison to what is happening elsewhere, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, is that we've maintained our tax position at the 30%, which is where it's been for a very long time. What has happened though in the last budget was that there were some changes to increase the threshold. So a lot of people are falling more outside of the tax bracket, and that's because of an analysis that was done of if you like, the effect of inflation on a large segment of our population. But what is interesting, though, from an investment point of view, is that we have a full suite of fiscal incentives and legislation that facilitates inbound investment by foreigners and locals alike, where you could get a 15-year tax holiday, customs duties exempt on the importation of raw materials and on building supplies. So say, for example, you want to take advantage of what is comparatively speaking, cheaper beachfront lands, and you want to build a small, because there are options available for different scales of development. You can basically do this with no taxation. And avail yourself of a very simple application process once you have the capital to inject. So yes, there is this tax regime at 30%, but there are these options available for people who have capital or who have access to capital to invest and actually basically, propel the country in a certain way, and not pay any taxes for 10 or 15 years once their investment is to a certain level.
Thank you for that. Keith, do you want to comment? Or?
Yeah, just to actually piggyback a bit on Jeffrey was saying in regard to taxation. So additionally, in the recent times, they've started this, from an existing concept called economic substance, wherein more or less major companies, if you have certain quote unquote economic substance, so you may have a head office in St. Lucia, for example, and enough operations in St. Lucia, you're more or less tax exempt. And I think the benefit of that is, so for example, we have a few regional banks. Their head office is actually in St. Lucia because they want to benefit from that tax exemption. When you do that, you're bringing in maybe your CEO, you're bringing in your high-level people. These people are coming and they're also contributing to the economy. Now, we have a very large population of expats in St. Lucia. Because of that, that drives livability. Because the more quote-unquote high-level people you have in your island, the better housing you want in your island. You know, so now we have what is really a world-class marina in St. Lucia. We have a really good golf course. Another one is being built by Cabot, which is supposed to be one of the best golf courses in the world when it's done, which should be in about a year or two. So because of that, and because of the money we're generating from all our programs, we're not saying, hey, come and just be tax exempt. We're telling you, yes, there are taxes, but if you invest in St. Lucia to make it better, we will invest in you and we will make things easier for you. And that then drives the economy, that then drives infrastructure, that then drives livability, that just drives more people to the island. And you have this continuous cycle, or what should definitely be a continuous cycle of growth and expansion of our economy, which will again improve livability and get more and more people and more foreign direct investment and more income and revenue to the island. And I think that's really worked well in the last few years, and which is why I think our transition from agriculture to tourism has been a really massive success, at least in my opinion. I think in the Caribbean, also as someone who's lived in London for a long amount of time, who's traveled to Europe, to the UAE, to Asia, I think for livability, yes, we're not Dubai. We don't want to be Dubai, but I think we're definitely a good mix of, you know, sea, sun, sand, but also good infrastructure, good internet, good options to eat, good access. I think we really have a bit of everything. And honestly, I think St. Lucia is livable for almost any profile of person.
Great. Thanks a lot. For those who are just joining, we do these live streams every week, htj.tax/events. If you visit our website and you comment through one of the chat portals, St. Lucia, you can win a chance to attend our Nomad Offshore Summit at the end of January and have a conversation with Jeffrey and Keith in person and talk more about the St. Lucia advantage.
So if you're a 6, 7, or 8-figure investor, entrepreneur, or business owner who needs a tailor-made solution from a qualified team of professionals, we can help you achieve the international lifestyle, the freedom, and even the tax savings you're looking for. Visit us at htj.tax and live that international life.